Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. Emma Carter had always been the kind of person who made an office run smoothly, though few ever gave her the credit she deserved. She worked at one of the top investment firms in the city, tucked away behind glass towers and polished boardrooms, where the real decisions seemed to be made by men in suits. Her job title said secretary, but the reality was much more complicated. She wasn't just arranging calendars and typing up minutes. She was the silent thread holding the fabric of the company together. Every morning started the same. She arrived early, long before the executives trickled in with their coffees and half-prepared thoughts. She organized the day's schedule, ensuring meetings didn't clash, flights were booked correctly, and conference calls went through without a glitch. Her phone buzzed with requests from managers who constantly forgot details, documents left unsigned, contracts missing key pages, errors in financial presentations they'd rehearsed for weeks. Emma always caught the mistakes, corrected them quietly, and never asked for praise. It wasn't in her nature to brag, but sometimes, when she stayed late fixing yet another oversight, she wondered if anyone noticed how much she did to protect the firm from embarrassment. She had a sharp mind for numbers, a memory that held onto the smallest details, and an instinct for reading people. Many of the financial models that executives presented in glossy slideshows had been double-checked and restructured by her hands. She never claimed ownership, though the spotlight was reserved for others. When board members congratulated the senior partners for flawless planning, Emma sat at her desk in silence, knowing it was her careful touch that had kept everything from falling apart. Lately, the office buzzed with anticipation about a massive deal, the potential merger of two companies valued at $90 million. Everyone spoke about it as if it were history in the making, a move that could elevate careers and cement reputations. Emma had been knee-deep in it for weeks. Drafting, filing, and cross-referencing documents, she had combed through every clause in the contracts, every projection in the spreadsheets. She could recite sections of the agreements from memory, but no one would ever ask her to. In the minds of her colleagues, she was only there to support the real players. Still, she cared about the outcome. She wanted to see the company succeed, if only because she had invested her own late nights and energy into it. She had memorized the deal's pitfalls, the areas where numbers seemed fragile, and the loopholes a clever lawyer could exploit. To her, the merger wasn't just a headline. It was a puzzle she had already solved in her head. But she knew better than to voice these thoughts out loud. People didn't expect a secretary to have opinions on $90 million decisions. One Thursday morning, as she was finalizing travel arrangements for a partner flying in from London, she was summoned into Mr. Anderson's office. He was the CEO, a man who carried himself with practiced authority, his voice filling the room even when he said very little. He informed her that she would need to attend the upcoming negotiation meeting with both companies. "We'll need you there to take notes," he said, almost as if it were a kindness he was offering her. Emma nodded, hiding her mixed feelings. On the surface, she was calm, professional, and unflappable, but inside, she felt the familiar sting of being reduced to a role she had long outgrown. She knew she had more to contribute than shorthand scribbles in a notebook. Still, she reminded herself to stay composed. The day of the meeting arrived, and the air in the boardroom was heavy with tension and ambition. Executives from both sides sat stiffly across from one another, portfolios stacked like shields. Emma slipped into her chair at the edge of the room, notebook in hand, deliberately choosing a place where she could observe everything without drawing attention. When Mr. Anderson introduced the team, he spoke with pride about the firm's senior partners, its lawyers, and its financial experts. Then, almost as an afterthought, he gestured toward Emma. "And this is Emma Carter, just a secretary. She'll be recording today's discussion." His tone carried no malice, but the dismissal was sharp enough to cut. Emma felt several eyes flicker toward her, sizing her up, dismissing her just as quickly. She didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled politely, the same quiet, practiced smile she used whenever someone underestimated her. Inside, though, a small fire lit. She would take her notes, yes, but she knew something no one else in that room did. And when the time came, she would be ready. The meeting began with a heavy silence, broken only by the shuffle of papers and the click of pens against polished wood. On one side of the long conference table sat Mr. Anderson and his team of executives, flanked by lawyers in tailored suits. Across from them, the opposing company mirrored the same setup, an army of professionals determined to fight for every dollar. Emma sat near the corner, her notebook open, pen poised, the very picture of a secretary ready to record the details of history in the making. To anyone glancing her way, she was invisible, just another background figure. The CEOs began their posturing, each trying to assert dominance in subtle ways. One leaned back casually in his chair, making it seem as though 90 million was pocket change, while the other leaned forward, voice sharp and deliberate, as if every word were a weapon. Lawyers picked at the numbers like vultures, circling, testing each other's patience. Emma wrote down the exchanges, her handwriting neat and precise, but her ears caught more than what she jotted down. Beneath the surface-level negotiations, she detected a rhythm, shifts in tone, small contradictions in financial figures, pressure points masked by jargon. She noticed a number being quoted incorrectly, a misalignment in percentages that could snowball into millions if left unchecked. Her pen hovered for a second, then she glanced at Mr. Anderson, wondering if she should speak. Leaning slightly toward him, she whispered, "That's not the right figure. It should be 42, not 48. But Mr. Anderson didn't even look at her. He waved a hand dismissively, keeping his eyes fixed on the other CEO. "It's fine. I've got this," he murmured, just loud enough for the people beside them to hear. The lawyer next to him smirked. "Don't worry. She's just the secretary," he said lightly, the words dripping with condescension, sparking quiet chuckles around the table. Emma felt her face flush, though she kept her composure. She smiled faintly, her lips curving upward with practiced ease, masking the sting of humiliation beneath. They saw her as harmless, irrelevant. But she knew better. As the meeting stretched on, Emma's silence became her strength. She absorbed every word, every detail, storing them in the catalog of her mind. Unlike the others, she wasn't distracted by ego or performance. She was studying the deal like a chessboard. And she already saw the trap waiting in the corner. Weeks earlier, while reviewing the contracts, she had come across a clause buried deep within the fine print. On the surface, it appeared harmless, a standard adjustment provision that would allow for renegotiation if certain market shifts occurred. But when she read it closely, she realized it had been worded in a way that could be weaponized. If triggered, it could slash her company's profit share by nearly 15%, a blow amounting to millions. It was the kind of detail most executives wouldn't notice. They relied on briefings, on quick summaries prepared by assistants. But Emma read every line herself. She had highlighted it, flagged it in her private notes, even drafted a counter-amendment that no one had asked for. She knew exactly how dangerous that clause was, and she knew exactly how to disarm it. The men at the table didn't. The conversation turned, as she feared it would, toward that very section of the agreement. One of the opposing company's lawyers, a sharp-eyed man with a voice smooth as glass, leaned into the discussion. He asked for a slight clarification on the adjustment clause, phrasing his request casually, as if it were a minor housekeeping detail. But Emma caught the gleam in his eyes. This was his play. As the lawyer spoke, he twisted the language to his advantage, laying the groundwork to activate the loophole. He argued that the clause, as written, provided flexibility in the event of market fluctuations. He pressed for its inclusion in the final version of the deal, suggesting it was standard practice. Emma's stomach tightened. She looked around the table. None of the executives from her firm were reacting. Mr. Anderson was nodding absently, already preparing to move on. The others shuffled papers, glancing at their own notes that told them nothing about the trap being set. They didn't see it. Not one of them realized what was about to happen. Her heart beat faster. She wanted to speak, to point it out, to slam her pen against the table and force them to listen. But she didn't. Not yet. She knew that if she spoke too soon, she would be brushed aside again, laughed off as the secretary who overstepped. Timing mattered more than anything here. So she smiled again, lowering her gaze to her notebook as though she were merely recording minutes. But her pen moved more slowly now, her mind racing ahead. She waited, listening as the lawyer's argument grew stronger, as the trapdoor swung wider open beneath the deal. The moment was coming. She could feel it. And when it did, she would be ready. The moment stretched thin in the room, the air buzzing with legal jargon and veiled strategies. Emma's pen hovered above her page, though she had stopped writing. Her eyes flicked from face to face, reading the currents of the conversation. The opposing lawyer pressed harder on the adjustment clause, his voice smooth, confident. He smelled blood in the water, and Emma knew her side was seconds away from walking into a trap that could cost them everything. Her hand moved deliberately toward her file case, resting by her chair. No one noticed. They were too caught up in their own egos, too busy posturing to see the storm about to break. She unlatched the case, the faint metallic click sounding louder to her ears than it really was. Inside, neatly tucked away, was the document she had prepared weeks ago. She had done it quietly, without instruction, anticipating this very moment. The pages contained corrected clauses, tightened language, and counterpoints that neutralized the loophole entirely. She had rewritten the deal in a way that protected her company, knowing full well that no one else had spotted the danger. Emma drew the document out, her movements calm, unhurried, as though she were simply pulling another page of notes. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. With steady hands, she slid the papers across the table, past Mr. Anderson, and set them squarely before the lawyers. The scrape of paper against would silence the room. One by one, heads turned toward her, confusion flickering in their eyes. The opposing lawyer paused mid-sentence, his words cut off as he glanced down at the unexpected document now resting in front of him. He picked it up, skimming quickly, then slowing as the weight of the amendments hit him. His jaw tightened. He passed the papers to his colleague, who frowned as he read, and then another lawyer leaned over, brows furrowing deeper with every line. The confidence they had worn moments ago began to crumble. On Emma's side of the table, the reaction was just as striking. Executives leaned forward, eyes widening as they read the document. One of them muttered under his breath, astonished. Another looked at Emma as if seeing her for the first time. It dawned on them all at once. The loophole was closed, the trick neutralized. The millions that could have slipped away had been locked safely back into the company's hands. And it hadn't been the CEO, nor the senior partners, nor the high-priced lawyers who had done it. It had been the woman they called, just a secretary. The room fell into a silence, so complete that Emma could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. Every pair of eyes, whether grudging or admiring, turned toward her. She sat with her back straight, her face calm, as if she had done nothing more than pass along an agenda. Mr. Anderson's expression was a mixture of shock and discomfort. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. His authority, his entire image of control, had been undermined, not by an adversary, but by the very person he had dismissed earlier. He cleared his throat, forcing a chuckle. "Well, that's her job," he said, his voice straining for casualness. "She keeps track of the paperwork, makes sure everything's in order." He waved a hand as though to downplay it, as if Emma's intervention had been nothing more than good filing. But the others weren't buying it. One of the executives leaned toward Emma, nodding in genuine respect. "That was sharp," he said. "You caught something none of us did." Another murmured agreement, still poring over the corrected clauses with astonishment. Even a lawyer from the opposing side gave a small, reluctant nod of acknowledgement before setting the papers down. Emma said nothing. She only smiled faintly, her eyes steady. She hadn't done this for recognition, though the acknowledgement tasted sweeter than she expected. She had done it because she couldn't sit by and watch them walk blindly into ruin. Mr. Anderson avoided her gaze for the rest of the discussion. His earlier words, "just a secretary," seemed to echo back at him with cruel irony. Around the table, everyone now knew the truth. Emma Carter had just saved a $90 million deal with a single document. And she had done it without raising her voice. The negotiations, once tense and uncertain, moved swiftly after Emma's quiet intervention. With the loophole sealed shut and the terms of the merger finally balanced, the two sides found common ground. What had threatened to spiral into weeks of stalling and renegotiations was resolved in a matter of hours. Emma sat silently, her pen moving across the page again, capturing the final agreements as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When the signatures were inked and hands were shaken, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Smiles replaced scowls, and the atmosphere shifted from adversarial to celebratory. The deal, valued at $90 million, was officially closed, and the success carried an undertone that everyone in the room understood, even if no one dared to say it outright. It had been saved by the secretary in the corner. One of the investors from the opposing company leaned over as the papers were being gathered. "That was excellent foresight," he said, directing the comment not at Mr. Anderson or the senior partners, but at Emma. "Not many catch details like that." Sharp eye. Emma inclined her head politely, offering a small smile. "Just doing my job," she replied, her voice calm and steady, though inside she felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years, a sense of visible worth. Across the table, another board member muttered to Mr. Anderson, "You're lucky to have her on your team." The words carried a weight that made Anderson shift uncomfortably in his chair. His earlier dismissal, just a secretary, hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. He forced a tight smile, nodding as if he had known her value all along. But Emma knew the truth. Everyone did. As the lawyers packed their briefcases and the executives exchanged final pleasantries, a few from the opposing side took the time to acknowledge her directly. One shook her hand, something none of them had bothered to do at the start of the meeting. "That clause could have gutted the deal," he said honestly. "Good catch." For Emma, the praise wasn't about ego. It was about recognition. For years, she had worked in the background, her efforts hidden behind the signatures of executives who took the credit. But here, in this polished boardroom filled with powerful men, her contribution had been undeniable. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't demanded attention, and yet she had changed the course of the deal with one decisive act. Mr. Anderson lingered behind as the others filed out. His expression carried the weight of something unsaid, his authority dented. He glanced at Emma, then looked away quickly, pretending to straighten his papers. She wondered if he would apologize, or at least acknowledge her role. But instead, he muttered, "Good work," as though the words tasted strange in his mouth. Emma didn't press for more. She didn't need it. The shift had already happened. For the first time, she felt the balance tilt, her value no longer invisible, her presence no longer easily dismissed. Respect had been carved into the room not by her title, but by her actions. As she closed her notebook and gathered her things, Emma caught her reflection in the glass wall of the conference room. She still looked like the same secretary. Modest suit, tidy hair, calm demeanor. But something was different now. The people who had once overlooked her had seen her strength, and she had seen it herself. For years she had worked in silence, fixing mistakes, protecting reputations, keeping things together without recognition. Now, with a single document slid across a table, she had proved what she already knew deep down, that she was far more than just a secretary. And in that quiet realization, Emma felt something stronger than victory, dignity restored. In the days that followed, the story spread through the corridors of the firm like wildfire. Whispers passed from office to office, growing louder with each retelling. "Did you hear? The secretary saved the $90 million deal." Some told it with awe, others with disbelief, but no version of the story erased Emma's role. For once, her work wasn't invisible. It had been witnessed, undeniable, a turning point too significant to ignore. Emails trickled in from colleagues congratulating her, even those who had barely spoken to her before. A few were clumsy, carefully worded, as if afraid to admit they had underestimated her. Others were genuine, filled with respect. Soon, word reached outside the firm, and before long, she began receiving inquiries from recruiters and rival companies, each impressed by her sharpness and foresight. For the first time in her career, she wasn't being asked if she could schedule someone else's meeting. She was being asked if she wanted to lead her own. Yet Emma didn't rush to accept any offers. She carried herself through the following weeks with the same composure as always, calmly balancing schedules, reviewing documents, and fixing small mistakes before they snowballed. To those passing by her desk, she was the same efficient secretary they had always known. But inside, something had shifted. She no longer worked from a place of invisibility. She worked from a place of choice. Late one evening, when the office was quiet and the city lights glowed against the windows, Emma allowed herself a rare pause. She thought back to that moment in the boardroom, the sting of being introduced as just a secretary, the laughter that had followed, and the way she had chosen not to lash out, not to defend herself with words. Instead, she had let her work speak, and it had spoken louder than anything she could have said. She realized she didn't need Mr. Anderson's apology, nor a sudden promotion, offered out of guilt. Recognition from others had its value, yes, but it wasn't the prize she had been chasing. What mattered most was the quiet certainty that she had proved her worth to herself. She had always been capable, always been more than her title. That day in the boardroom hadn't changed who she was. It had simply revealed her strength in a way that could no longer be hidden. Emma closed her notebook with care, the same one she had carried into that meeting. She filed away her notes from the deal, placing them neatly into the cabinet as she had done countless times before. Her expression was calm, her smile the same quiet one she had worn when she was dismissed, only now it held a different meaning. As she turned off her desk lamp and gathered her things, she thought of the lesson etched into her journey. Sometimes, power isn't in the title on your door. It's in the quiet confidence of knowing your true worth. And with that thought, Emma walked out of the office, not just a secretary, but the architect of her own legacy. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel Awesome Visual Story.